Lords of the Fallen had one of the worst launches in modern Souls-like history. The game's performance made it borderline unplayable, the Umbral realm was way too aggressive, and the core balance was all over the place. But then, the developers refused to let it die. They dropped over 70 updates across 2 years and rebuilt the combat pacing, rebalanced enemies from the ground up, added a new difficulty mode, and more. For a title that was practically broken at launch, that's really something. So almost 3 years later, here I am trying to figure out, is Lords of the Fallen finally worth playing? And what I got was complicated. Because this game is not the disaster it launched as, but it's also not the redemption story some corners of the internet want it to be. The truth is somewhere in between, and it depends almost entirely on who you are as a player. Let me tell you what I found. Before anything, I have to talk about what this game is actually trying to do, because more instead, the world of Lords of the Fallen is not a simple backdrop. The entire world is in a state of terminal decay. Every surface tells you that this place has been dying for a long time, and whatever fight was happening here, humanity lost it centuries ago. That's the base layer. And on top of that base layer, the developers built something that's incredibly important in this genre. Architecture that is actively trying to intimidate you. The towers are absurdly tall, the arches are pointed and massive, the cathedrals are built to dwarf you. Not to impress you with grandeur, but to remind you that you are small and this world doesn't care that you're here. Classic Gothic design, but used for dread instead of divinity. And then the game starts mixing the stone and iron with something else entirely. The deeper you go, especially into the Umbral, the more the architecture stops being architecture. Walls made of ribs, floors made of calcified bone. Environments that look like a cathedral started fusing with the corpses of everyone who ever prayed inside it. It's genuinely unsettling in a way that doesn't need to announce itself. If you've played Dark Souls, Bloodborne or Elden Ring, you know how much those worlds communicate without dialogue. Lords of the Fallen is doing the same thing. That level of environmental storytelling baked into the architecture is what separates this game's world from most of its competition. Mornstead is genuinely impressive, and on that I have no complaints. But I'm gonna be honest with you. The opening of this game almost made me stop playing. And I have the full From Software catalog under my belt. See, I'm not someone who bounces off hard games, but the first few hours of Lords of the Fallen have a specific kind of dullness that's harder to push through than actual difficulty. The starter area is grey, linear, and forgettable. It eases you in so gently that you start to wonder if the game has anything interesting to say at all. The enemies feel generic, the atmosphere is trying hard to be epic, but the world hasn't earned your attention yet, and nothing hooks you. You're just walking forward, killing things, and waiting for something to happen. If you bounce off this game in the first 2 hours, I genuinely don't blame you. That opening is a problem that no patch has fixed, and in a genre where first impressions decide everything, it's a wound the game carries the entire way through. But then, you hit Skyrest Bridge and something shifts. Skyrest Bridge is the central hub. Think of it like the Firelink Shrine, a place where the NPCs gather, paths branch, and where the world starts revealing its actual shape. And from that bridge, the game spreads outward in a way that genuinely surprised me. Areas are physically connected to each other in ways you don't understand until hours later when you unlock a shortcut and realize you've looped back somewhere you've already been. This is a Dark Souls 1 philosophy, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. The interconnected world isn't just a design feature, it's the foundation of the entire game's identity. Opening a path that circles back to Skyrest after hours of trekking through swamps and crumbling cathedrals feels more rewarding than following any waypoint marker in most of the open world games from the last few years. The verticality is real too. Pilgrim's Perch, a massive cliffside monastery split across ascent and descent, would be a standout level in most games. Here, it's one of a dozen areas, each stacked on top of the other. You don't realize how big this world is until you're standing somewhere new and looking back at somewhere you've already been, and both are visible on the same screen. This is the best thing Lords of the Fallen does. The level design is genuinely excellent, and for a stretch, from Skyrest to roughly the third beacon, the game is actually good. Like, confidently good. The kind of good that makes you think the internet got this one completely wrong. And then, the cracks start showing. The Umbral realm is the game's core gimmick. At any point you can raise the lamp and peer into the realm of the dead, in real time with no loading screen. Walls that exist in the living world might be gone. Gaps that seem impassable suddenly have a bridge of flesh and bone visible only through the lamp. Entire pathways that don't exist in the regular world open up through the Umbral. When you die in the living world, you don't go back straight to the last vestige point. Instead, you get pulled into the Umbral realm. Now, you're in the dead version of the world, which is more hostile and more aggressive. Survive long enough to reach an emergence point, and you come back with your vigor intact. But if you die in the Umbral itself, then that's a true death. It creates a genuine risk-reward loop that I actually respect. And the longer you stay in the Umbral realm, the more dangerous it becomes. Enemies start spawning aggressively around you and the pressure to find an emergence point increases quickly. There's also a resource management layer built around vestige seeds. Consumable items that let you plant a temporary checkpoint in specific places. While it might sound like a simple quality of life feature, it actually creates a genuine tension around when and where you should use them. In fact, it allows you to manually tweak the difficulty of each area depending on your playthrough goals, which is awesome in my opinion. But here's the honest truth. The Umbral realm is at its best in the first half of the game. By the time you're deep into the second half, it stops feeling like a puzzle and starts feeling like a chore. You're crossing into the dead world not because it's interesting, but because you have to. The sense of discovery fades, and what's left is just frustration. So it's a cool mechanic that overstays its welcome by about 10 hours. But before advancing further, I need to talk about the crashes because it nearly made me quit the game twice. I played this game on an RTX 4070, a Core i5-12400 CPU and 32 gigs of RAM. This is not a monster rig, but it's also not a budget setup. And yet the game consistently threw low VRAM errors on medium graphics setting with DLSS performance enabled at 4K. It crashed before compiling shaders, mid-fast travel, and when loading into new areas. Every time the immersion built up, every time the game had me, there was a real chance it would just collapse underneath me. The first time it happened, I adjusted the settings and lowered everything further, and it still crashed. So I decided to do things manually by tweaking the game files, and guess what? It still crashed. And in those moments, I genuinely considered dropping the game. The only thing that kept me going was the game's core idea and the fact that the middle sections of the experience had already hooked me enough to push through. If those crashes had hit during the opening hours instead, this video wouldn't exist. Though, I want to be fair. I don't know if console players have the same experience. This may be a PC specific issue, but on PC in 2026, after 2 years of patches and optimization work, this should not be happening. If you're on console, this section may not apply to you. But if you're on PC, manage your expectations going in. Moving on, the combat foundation is fine. Stamina management, a posture system that rewards timing, and weight classes that genuinely affect your movement. The framework is there. In fact, I played almost the entire game as a strength build. I upgraded an axe 10 times and stacked stamina and health without thinking about magic or hybrid builds. I just wanted to learn the timings, don't get greedy, and punish the openings. And that approach works. The early boss encounters are legitimately great, and Pieta is the best example of this. A fallen paladin who moves with both grace and weight across multiple phases in a fight that teaches you the game's rhythm and then demands you perform it perfectly. That's a 9 out of 10 boss fight. If the whole game matched that quality, we'd be having a very different conversation. But it doesn't, because the combat is completely undermined by the game's foundational flaw. Lords of the Fallen takes bosses you already defeated and starts deploying them as regular enemies in later areas. Not once as a clever callback, but repeatedly and at times constantly. By the time you're deep into the second half, you're fighting what used to be significant encounters as throwaway mobs crammed into narrow corridors with dogs and ranged units pinning you from angles specifically designed to hit you while you're fighting something else. Speaking of which, at times the enemy density gets so absurdly high that it completely blurs the lines of the genre. It stops feeling like a Souls-like and borders on a hack and slash game. And to survive, you eventually realize you have to start treating it like one. Look, I understand the idea. You've grown stronger. What once terrified you is now just another obstacle. And the first time it happens, it actually works. You feel powerful, you feel like you've progressed, but by the 5th, 6th, 7th time, it stops feeling like a power fantasy and starts feeling like the game ran out of ideas. The enemy variety was already limited, so recycling bosses as mobs doesn't compensate for that. Instead, it exposes it, and when the difficulty is being manufactured by throwing more of the same enemies at you in worse configurations rather than by introducing something genuinely new, that's artificial difficulty. That's cheap, and it gets worse the closer you get to the end. And it's not just a recycling issue. Some of the boss fights themselves are genuinely poorly designed. Some feel like gimmick encounters built around a single trick rather than a real fight, and others are just visually uninspired in a game that otherwise has strong art direction. Some of these bosses are genuinely cool though, so it's not all bad. But hey, I want to be clear about something. This whole boss recycling business is not a get good problem. There's a massive difference between a genuine, rewarding challenge and padding a game with quantity over quality just because you ran out of ideas. These sorts of design mindsets are far more noticeable and damaging in these types of games compared to any other genre, and unfortunately Lords of the Fallen heavily suffers from it. Which is a shame, because the middle section of this game earned my respect, but the second half starts to collapse under its own weight. The enemy recycling compounds the fatigue, the Umbral stops surprising you, areas get narrower and more aggressively packed in ways that feel less designed and more desperate, the careful pacing that made Skyrest to the third beacon genuinely exciting just evaporates, and the game starts to feel less like a world you're exploring and more like a gauntlet you're being pushed through. And then there's the final boss. I'm not gonna spoil it, but I'll say this. Everything Mornstead builds toward, the corrupted soil, a god powerful enough to warp physical reality, over 30 hours of gothic dread stacked on top of each other, all of it points toward a confrontation that should feel monumental. But what you actually get is one of the most anticlimactic finales I've experienced in this genre in years. The journey is genuinely worth taking, but the destination is not worth what the journey promised. But combat is only half the picture, and the other half is where this game really struggles. The lore of Mornstead, the soil so corrupted they can't bury their dead, the god warping physical reality, the church that turned faith into a prison, all of that is genuinely interesting. There's moral complexity hidden in here if you look for it. It's pretty clear that the game has something real to say, but unfortunately it just can't quite say it because the moment the character opens their mouth the spell breaks. You see, the problem is that the writing doesn't match the world. Every NPC sounds like a modern person who read a description of a gothic fantasy setting and try to sound apart.
That's right. Through my veins flows the blood of the legendary hero who defied Adir and the Rogar and saved the whole world, only to be betrayed and murdered by a common criminal.
Dark Souls characters speak like the world shaped them, but Lords of the Fallen characters speak like they are describing the world from outside it. You'll walk through a cathedral that looks like it was designed by someone who understood exactly what dread is supposed to feel like, and then a character will deliver a line that belongs in a mid-budget fantasy movie from 2012. Part of what makes this so jarring is the contrast in diction. Dark Souls characters speak with an archaic, almost Shakespearean weight, using vocabulary and sentence structures that makes them feel like they genuinely belong to an ancient world.
Ashen One, hearest thou my voice still?
Lords of the Fallen's characters speak in plain modern English. In a world that looks this ancient and this dark, that contrast kills the immersion. So is Lords of the Fallen finally worth playing in 2026? Here's my honest answer. Yes, but with conditions that matter. If you're a Souls-like veteran who has exhausted FromSoftware's catalog and you want something new to sink into, play it. The level design alone justifies the time. Pilgrim's Perch, the interconnected design, the way Mornstead reveals itself slowly, that stuff is genuinely excellent. There are some cool encounters and even cooler environments. And the world, visually and architecturally, is doing something ambitious. If you bounce off the launch version and never went back, it's a meaningfully better game now. The chaos that made 2023 unplayable has been brought under control, and what's left underneath is something that actually has a soul. But if technical frustrations kill your enjoyment, and they might, especially on PC, go in with your expectations managed. If you need the second half to match the first half, it won't. If you need the writing to match the world, it doesn't. And if you need the ending to pay off everything the game built, prepare yourself. Lords of the Fallen is a game that reaches for something great and lands somewhere between decent and genuinely good, depending on the hour. It's not the disaster it launched as, and it's not the redeemed masterpiece some people are calling it. It's a flawed, ambitious Souls-like with a world worth exploring, a level design worth respecting, and a second half that doesn't deserve the first. Now, I want to know what you think. Did you walk away at launch and never look back, or did you stick around through the patches? And if you did go back, did it actually change your mind? Let me know in the comments.